I heard them planning my funeral through the thin wall while I was still breathing, not whispering, not crying, planning, calmly, practically, as if I were already lying in the ground and the dirt had settled. I remember staring at the ceiling, my breath shallow from the fever, thinking, so that's how quietly a life can be erased, in the next room, by your own blood. The house was old, and the walls were thin enough to betray anyone's intentions. I'd always thought that made us closer, that a family shouldn't need thick walls. What a foolish woman I'd been. At 79, you'd think you stopped being naive. But no, some lessons arrive late, like unwelcome visitors. Her color was terrible this morning, my daughter-in-law whispered. Fiona, a woman who could make kindness look like suspicion. She won't last the month, my son answered. My Thomas, my only child. His voice had that irritated edge, like even my potential dying was an inconvenience. We need to get the house sorted before the market dips again. The house. Always the house. Never me. I lay still, afraid they'd hear the ragged turn of my breath. I wasn't dying. Not tonight. Not soon. I'd been sick for 2 days, nothing more. But to them, that was enough to start dividing what I'd spent my entire life building with Arthur, my late husband. I could almost hear him now, that gentle, stubborn man. Be careful, Marielle. People reveal themselves when they think you're not listening. I listened, and it hurt. Do we need to call the lawyer? Fiona asked. No, Thomas said. She already signed the papers last month. My stomach tightened. Papers? I'd signed something, yes, but he'd told me it was about simplifying utilities, nothing serious. My hand had shaken then, but he'd been patient, as if doing me a favor. God, how blind I'd been. And the funeral? Fiona added softly, almost sweetly. Nothing extravagant. She'd prefer something simple. He chuckled. My son chuckled. Simple is good and fast. No delays. The sooner the house is free, the better. My throat closed, not from fever, but from a truth so sharp it felt like broken glass. I tried to shift in bed, carefully, slowly. My bones felt fragile, as if the years had finally caught up tonight of all nights. My hand reached for the glass of water on my nightstand, but I stopped halfway. I didn't want the sound of it revealing that the dead woman was still alive. They moved on to money then, my investments. The bank accounts I'd trusted Thomas to organize. They spoke of them like items on a shopping list. Not once, not even once, did they say my name with softness or worry, only impatience. If she gets worse, call Dr. Myers, Fiona said. She won't need him, Thomas replied. And silence settled, heavy and final as soil. I laid there long after their voices faded, staring into the dark. My fever was easing, strangely enough. Maybe anger burns hotter than illness. I felt something inside me shift, lift, straighten. Not revenge, not hysteria. Something simpler, older. Dignity waking up after a long sleep. I was still here, still breathing. And I would not leave quietly. I moved my legs off the bed, forcing my feet onto the cold wooden floor. For a moment the room tilted, but I held on to the dresser. My reflection in the mirror looked older than yesterday, but sharper too, alive in a way that frightened even me. They think I'm dying, I whispered to the woman in the glass. She did not look like someone who would give them what they wanted. I reached for my robe, steadying my breath. If Thomas believed I'd signed away my house, my life, then tomorrow I would find out exactly what he'd tried to take from me. But tonight, Tonight I simply stood there in the quiet, feeling the weight of betrayal settle into something colder, steadier. Resolve. The dead woman was walking again. By morning, the fever had loosened its grip, but the bitterness in my chest had only settled deeper. Sleep had come in scraps, a drift, a jolt, a memory of their voices behind the wall. I lay awake at dawn, listening to the radiator hiss, feeling the old ache in my knees return like an unwelcome guest. Age is funny. The body weakens, but the heart can still sharpen like a blade when pushed. I sat up slowly, my hands trembling slightly, not from illness, but from something heavier. The realization that the last few months hadn't been confusion or coincidence. They had been a pattern, a careful one. And I had walked right into it. I remember the first sign. It was such a small thing. Fiona offering to handle my shopping cart because she said the chip was failing. She smiled so warmly that day. A practiced smile, I see that now. She said she'd bring receipts, but somehow she never did. I told myself not to fuss, not to be suspicious. Suspicion felt unmotherly. Then Thomas suggested simplifying my finances, calling it streamlining. He sat at my kitchen table, spreading out papers as if he were guiding a child through her homework. Just sign here, Mom. You're making it too hard on yourself. I remember asking him twice, is this about the house? And twice he said no. The lie had slid out so easily I hadn't even seen it. I rubbed my temples now, feeling foolish and oddly steady at the same time. It's painful when you realize the trap was built slowly, kindly, with soft words and gentle hands. A long con, disguised as help. But the body understands when love has gone stale, long before the mind dares to name it. I swung my legs over the side of the bed again, feeling how fragile I was. My bones felt like they might splinter under a wrong thought. That weakness used to frighten me. Now it made me careful, deliberate. You don't need strength to stand up for yourself at 79. You need clarity. I looked around my bedroom, the one place still untouched by their intrusions. My husband's old sweater draped over the chair, his toolbox under the bed, though I hadn't opened it since he died. Dusty photographs on the dresser. Every corner held something honest. My son, on the other hand, seemed to prefer things stripped bare, simplified, including me. There was a time he'd come here after work, just to sit beside me and drink tea. A time he'd hug me without hesitation. A time he wasn't ashamed to say, "This is my mother." Years before Fiona taught him the language of convenience. I reached for my slippers and climbed to my feet. My legs complained, but they held. That's all I needed from them today. In the kitchen, the light was pale and cold. I turned on the kettle and stood by the window while it heated. My garden looked tired. Winter always made it look older, like me. But beneath all that gray and brown, the roots were still alive. Waiting. Preparing. That's what I felt like now. A quiet root waking under frozen soil. As I poured the tea, I thought of the documents Thomas had mentioned. Papers I had signed with trust. The way a mother signs a permission slip for a child going on a school trip. But I wasn't signing for a child. I was signing away pieces of myself. I remembered the day he'd insisted I give him a house key. He said he wanted to check on me, make sure I wasn't falling or forgetting things. I'd believed him. I didn't want to think the worst of him. I still don't. But the truth doesn't require my permission to exist. Halfway through my tea, I found myself walking toward the old cabinet in the hall, the one with the stiff drawer Arthur used to curse at. I pulled it open and began digging through the folders. Tax returns, insurance papers, medical forms, all the usual clutter of a long life. And then I found the folder I didn't recognize. New, thick, labeled in Thomas's handwriting. My fingers hesitated on the cover. I don't know why. Fear, maybe. Not of death, but of proof. When I opened it, I didn't feel surprised. I felt confirmed. Transfer authorizations. Access permissions. A preliminary agreement for sale. All with my signature. I sat down in the hallway chair because my legs couldn't hold my weight anymore. They weren't waiting for my death. They were preparing for it. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt something rise inside me. Not anger, not sorrow. Resolve. Cold. Quiet. Unmovable. Tomorrow, I would call the bank. Tomorrow, I would call a lawyer. Today, I would simply breathe. Because I was still alive. And that was enough to ruin their plans. By noon, my hands had stopped trembling. Not because the shock had faded, it hadn't, but because something inside me had settled, like mud sinking to the bottom of a glass after years of being stirred. Betrayal, once named, becomes strangely manageable. You stop flinching and start thinking. I sat at the kitchen table with that folder Thomas had so neatly prepared for me. My death, organized with office supplies. The papers were spread in front of me like a map of how I'd been handled, guided, pushed. Every signature of mine looked unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone tired, someone who trusted too easily, someone who didn't believe her own child would ever deceive her. I closed the folder. I didn't need to stare at my own mistakes any longer. The first real step was simple. Stand up. My legs protested, but I rose anyway. I wrapped my scarf around my neck, an old woolen thing I'd knitted decades ago, and walked to the door. I didn't bother telling Thomas or Fiona that I was leaving. I didn't owe them explanations. If anything, they owed me years of them. Outside, the air was sharp, biting at my cheeks. I hadn't felt cold like that in a long time. It woke me. That was good. I needed clarity today. The bank was a 15-minute walk, 15 minutes that used to feel short when Arthur was alive and long ever since. But today, the distance felt like a boundary. Every step away from the house made me feel less like prey and more like the woman I used to be. The one Arthur trusted to handle bills and decisions. The one who ran our little carpentry business books for 20 years. I wasn't always this helpless thing they sculpted me into. Inside the bank, warm air and the smell of printer ink greeted me. A young clerk looked up, surprised, as if old women only came here accompanied. "Good afternoon, ma'am. How can I help you?" "I need to review all accounts associated with my name," I said. "All automatic transactions. All authorizations. Everything." She blinked at the firmness in my voice. People my age aren't expected to have firmness. We went through the security steps, and then she began clicking through the accounts. With every screen she opened, her eyebrows climbed a little higher. "Mrs. Hunt, there are several recurring transfers here, large ones, and a standing authorization under someone named." "My son," I finished. She nodded slowly. "Would you like to suspend these?" "No," I said. "I'd like to cancel every single one. Permanently." For a second, the girl stared at me with something that looked like respect. Then she began typing. I watched each item turn red on her screen. Disabled, revoked, terminated. With each click, my chest felt lighter. "Is there anything else, Mrs. Hunt?" she asked. "Yes. I need to remove my son from any form of financial access. Effective, immediately. She hesitated. Are you sure? I met her eyes. I know exactly what I'm doing. When she finished the paperwork, she handed me a pen. My signature looked a little stronger this time. Walking out of the bank, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. The sun was already dipping low, painting the buildings gold. I stopped on the sidewalk, breathing it in. Next step, a lawyer. Arthur had always handled the legal side of things, but after he died, I kept one name in my address book. A quiet man named Harold Fincher. He'd helped with Arthur's will. Fair, patient, kind in a way that didn't feel patronizing. I hadn't spoken to him in 8 years, but suddenly I remembered the steadiness in his voice. I dialed the number, expecting an assistant, but it was him who answered. Mrs. Hunt, he said after a pause, long enough to show recognition. It's been a while. Yes, I said, and I'm afraid I need help again. Urgently. His tone changed immediately, professional, focused. What happened? I looked down at my gloves, twisting the fingertips. I seem to have signed documents under false pretenses. I need to know exactly what authority my son has been given, and I need to undo it. Come in tomorrow morning, he said. We'll go through everything. You're not alone in this. Not alone. Funny how a stranger can offer what your own family won't. I hung up and began walking home, the cold biting deeper, but failing to reach the place inside me that had already turned to iron. As I approached the porch, I saw the thin wall where I'd heard them planning my funeral. I didn't look away. Tomorrow, I would learn what else they'd taken, and tomorrow I would take it back. The next morning, I woke before the alarm I hadn't used in years. It was still dark outside, that bluish winter dark that makes the world look half unreal. But I felt strangely awake. Not young. No, that ship sailed long ago. But present. Aware. Like someone who's finally stopped pretending she doesn't see the water rising around her ankles. My knees hurt as always, but pain felt like a companion today, not an enemy. I dressed slowly, choosing my heavier coat. Banks are always cold, as if they're storing winter between their walls. Before I left, I glanced at the thin wall again, the one that had betrayed my son's real thoughts. It no longer felt like the wall had betrayed me. They had? By the time I arrived at the bank, the morning rush had begun. But people parted around me the way they do when they think a woman my age is fragile. I used to shrink under that kind of attention. Today, I walked straight through. The same young clerk from yesterday recognized me. Her posture straightened immediately. Respect again. But this time, it didn't make me feel embarrassed. It made me feel steady. Mrs. Hunt, she said softly, our back office processed your request. All authorizations tied to your son's name have been removed. There is one more thing we need to review with you. She led me to a small, glass-walled office. I sat down carefully, folding my coat beside me. There are transactions here, she continued, pulling up the screen. Regular ones, to companies connected to your daughter-in-law. Household services, contractors, maintenance subscriptions. Most of them unnecessary. Many unusually expensive. Of course they were. Of course. How many? I asked. A total of 23 recurring payments, she said. All drafted from your accounts. My jaw tightened. I wasn't surprised, but seeing the number made something cold settle deeper in me. Cancel everyone, I said. Permanently. And if anything comes through under those names again, block it automatically. Yes, ma'am. She typed quickly. Each canceled line felt like a knot loosening in my chest. While she worked, she added gently, "If you don't mind my saying, it's good you came in. These patterns, they often go unnoticed for years." I didn't look away. That's exactly what they were counting on. When it was done, she handed me a folder with updated account summaries. Thin, clean, finally, mine again. I thanked her and stepped outside. The cold air stung my face, but I welcomed it. I needed that sharpness, a reminder to stay awake. On the way home, I stopped by the small grocery store. I didn't need much, just bread, eggs, tea, simple things. But as I stood in line, I realized how long it had been since I'd bought groceries for myself, not for guests I rarely saw, or dishes Thomas claimed he liked but never thanked me for. An entire life can become service before you notice it's no longer love. Back home, I made tea and sat at the kitchen table with the new folder. No more hidden drafts. No more signatures slipped under my hand. My accounts were protected now, but money was only one part of it. The house, the legal papers, the signatures I had given without understanding, those were next. At exactly 10, I left for Harold Fincher's office, a quiet brick building that had looked old even 20 years ago. When I walked inside, he came out from his office personally. He hadn't changed much, just more gray, more lines, but the same calm eyes. "Mrs. Hunt?" he greeted, shaking my hand gently. "Come in." I sat in the leather chair across from him and placed Thomas's folder on his desk. Harold opened it, his brows drawing together as he skimmed the contents. After a few minutes, he looked up. "These documents," he said carefully, "grant your son preliminary authority to act on your behalf. Not full power of attorney, but close enough if you were incapacitated. The property, yes, here. This is a preparatory agreement for sale. Not binding, yet. But if you hadn't come today—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. My palms felt cold, but my voice stayed steady. "Can I revoke everything? Today?" "Yes," he said, "and I will help you do it." We spent the next hour going through each document. Revocations, protections, restrictions, safeguards. He explained what every paper meant, slowly, respectfully, something my own son hadn't bothered to do. By the time we finished, my hand ached from signing. But these signatures were different. These were mine, chosen freely. Before I left, Harold folded his hands and said quietly, "You're doing the right thing. People don't always change for the better as they age. But neither do you have to accept being treated as less than a person." I nodded, because I finally believed that. When I stepped outside, the sun had come out, faint and winter weak, but still light. I stood there for a moment, breathing. Today, I had taken back my money. Tomorrow, I would take back my future. And then they would learn that the woman they were already burying was very much alive and no longer willing to serve as their silent convenience. By the time I reached home from Harold's office, the afternoon light had thinned into that gray-blue shade that always reminded me of early endings. But nothing was ending today. Not for me. If anything, a part of me felt as if someone had opened a long, locked window inside my chest. The air was cold, but it was mine. I hung my coat, made tea, and sat at the dining table with Harold's printed documents. He'd been patient, steady, and clearer than anyone had been with me in years. When you get old, people tend to speak to you as if your mind has softened like bread left in the rain. But he didn't. He spoke to me the way Arthur used to, directly, respectfully, expecting me to understand. And I did. more than Thomas had ever imagined. On the top was the summary. Your property is secure. No agreements can proceed without your explicit presence and signature. A simple sentence. But to me, it felt like reclaiming a limb I thought I'd lost. I ran my fingers along the edge of the papers, remembering Harold's last words before I left his office. "You're not fighting your son," he said quietly. "You're reclaiming your autonomy." Autonomy. I'd forgotten I ever had such a thing. The kettle clicked off, pulling me back. As I poured the tea, memories rose like dust from old corners. It had started after Arthur died. The first time Thomas said, "Mom, you shouldn't be dealing with this alone," I felt gratitude. Then came, "Mom, let me handle this," which felt comforting. Then, "Mom, just sign here," which felt inevitable. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being a mother and became a task to manage, a responsibility to reduce, a resource to control. Not anymore. After finishing my tea, I went to the cabinet in the hallway, the same one where I'd found the troubling folder. I opened the lower drawer, the one Arthur used for his tools. My hands hesitated when I saw his handwriting on an old envelope tucked under a rusted wrench. "For Marielle, in case you ever need to stand your ground. Trust Arthur to speak across years." Inside was a list of contacts he'd left for future safety, our insurance agent, a financial advisor, even an elder rights consultant, someone he once said every aging person should have just in case the world grows colder. The world had grown colder, but Arthur, in his quiet wisdom, had warmed my path again. I placed the envelope carefully on the dining table. Tomorrow, I would call every number. Not because I feared Thomas anymore, but because I refused to let anyone guide my life for me. As I moved through the house, checking windows, touching furniture, I felt as if I were reintroducing myself to my own home. This place had held me through 40 years of life. Through joys, losses, birthdays, illnesses, repairs, celebrations. It had seen me whole. It had seen me broken, but never defeated. In the living room, I sat on Arthur's old armchair, the one Thomas always said I should replace because it looks outdated. Outdated. That word had bruised me more than I admitted. But sitting in it now, the fabric sun-faded and soft, I felt anchored. Thomas didn't know this house. He knew its value, yes, but not its history. Not the memories woven into every creak of the floorboards. And that, perhaps, was why he could plan to sell it so easily. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. Tomorrow, I would secure the trust. Tomorrow, I would put every safeguard in place. But tonight, I allowed myself a moment of quiet. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a burden waiting to be pushed aside. I felt like a woman reclaiming the ground beneath her feet. And the strangest part? It didn't feel like rebellion. It felt like coming home. The next morning began with an unusual kind of silence. Not the heavy kind that settles after disappointment, but the alert kind, like the pause between a lightning flash and thunder. I knew the storm would come. People who rely on your weakness don't stay quiet once they sense you've slipped out of their grasp. It didn't take long. At 9:17 a.m., my phone rang. Thomas. I let it ring until it stopped. At 9:19, again. Then 9:22. Then 9:27 with a text. "Mom, something's wrong with the accounts. Call me. Now." I sat at the kitchen table stirring my tea. It tasted different today. Calmer, maybe because I wasn't swallowing it with resentment or fear. I let the phone vibrate on the table like a wasp trapped under glass. He'd find out everything soon enough. The cancellations, the revoked authorizations, the freeze on transfers, the limits set only under my signature now. At 9:35, Fiona called. Her ringtone had always grated on me. A high chiming thing she'd set herself when she helped me organize the phone. This time, I muted it without hesitation. Then came her message, sharp and clipped. Marielle, the mortgage payment bounced. What did you do? We need to resolve this immediately. Call me. Mortgage payment. My mortgage had been paid off 26 years ago. What they were paying was their mortgage, the large, stylish house they insisted they needed to accommodate future family gatherings. Family gatherings I wasn't invited to anymore. I disabled notifications for both of them. By 10:00, the calls had become frantic. The polite concern had evaporated. Now there was urgency, almost accusation. I wasn't afraid, but I could feel my heartbeat in my hands, pulsing steadily. Not from panic, but from the undeniable truth that I was doing something my son never expected. Choosing myself. Around noon, the house fell quiet. My phone stopped its shaking. Even the street outside felt still. I thought perhaps they'd given up for the day, but people don't give up on things they think they own. At 12:40, a car door slammed outside. Not just closed, slammed. I recognized Thomas's stride on the walkway. Heavy, fast, irritated. The sound of a man who thought he was arriving to fix a mistake. I didn't stand. I didn't rush. I let him ring the bell. Mom! His voice was sharp through the door. Open up. We need to talk. Right now. I walked to the hallway slowly, letting each step steady me. When I opened the door, Thomas looked rattled. Truly rattled. His hair was uncombed, and the phone in his hand was lit with alerts. Why aren't you answering? He demanded. Because I didn't want to, I said simply. He stared, taken aback, as if it had never occurred to him that I was allowed to refuse. There's an issue with the bank, he said quickly, stepping inside without waiting for permission. All the payments you set up, the ones we agreed on, they're bounced or canceled. Mom, what did you sign? Who did you talk to? I closed the door gently behind him. I talked to my bank. And? His voice cracked on the edge of anger and fear. And I canceled every financial authorization you had. For a moment, he didn't breathe. Then, you what? I didn't flinch. I took back control of my accounts. His face darkened, the way it used to when he was a child caught lying about something small, a broken window, a stolen coin. Except this time the stakes were bigger. His voice rose. You can't just do that. We have expenses, commitments. I told you I'd manage things for you. No, I said quietly. You manage things for yourself. He opened his mouth, ready to spit out another justification, but I lifted my hand. It surprised him into silence. Thomas, I said, you've been using my money to fund your life, not mine. That's not fair. It's true. His jaw clenched. I could see the panic behind the anger. The sudden realization that the quiet old woman he depended on financially had stopped being convenient. You should have told me, he muttered. I shouldn't have had to, I replied. He looked around the house then, not in nostalgia, but calculation. I saw it clearly, maybe for the first time. The walls, the furniture, every corner of this place. He didn't see my life in them. He saw assets, numbers, a future payout. And now he was realizing it wasn't his. Mom, he said slower, trying gentleness like a borrowed coat that didn't fit. This isn't good for you. You're confused. Fiona thinks, Thomas, I said softly. I heard you planning my funeral through that wall. Silence. The thick, suffocating kind. His mouth fell open, then closed. Color drained from his face. For a moment, he looked like a boy again. A boy who'd been caught not just lying, but being cruel. Mom, that's not... You misunderstood. I didn't, I said. Not a single word. He swallowed hard. He had no excuse ready, no trick this time. I stepped aside. Thomas, I need you to leave. His eyes widened. You're kicking me out. I'm asking you to go, I corrected, before you say something that will make this worse. He hesitated, but only for a breath. Then he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The house shook, but I didn't. For the first time in years, I didn't. I stood there in the quiet entryway, my hand on the doorframe, feeling my pulse return to its steady, rightful pace. They thought I was dying. They were wrong. I was waking up. After Thomas left, the house felt strangely calm. Not empty. Calm, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, letting the silence settle on my shoulders like a shawl. It didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. But calm is fragile. By mid-afternoon, I felt the exhaustion creeping up on me, not from age, but from truth finally being spoken aloud. Confrontations, even quiet ones, take more strength than people realize. I made myself a bowl of soup and sat by the window. The winter light was thin, almost transparent, sliding across the old wooden floor. I traced the grain with my eyes, remembering how Arthur and I had chosen these planks ourselves. We wanted something honest, not shiny, not fashionable. Honest, the kind of wood that ages with you, not against you. As I ate, my phone buzzed, a gentler vibration than the frantic calls earlier. Lily, my granddaughter, the one person in this family who visited because she wanted to, not because she needed something signed. Her message was simple. Grandma, are you home? Can I stop by? I didn't answer with words. I just typed, yes, dear. 15 minutes later, I heard her knock. That soft double tap she'd always used since she was a child. Never demanding, always respectful. When I opened the door, she stood there with her scarf half askew, her cheeks pink from the cold, and a small grocery bag in her hands. Grandma, she breathed out, relief flooding her face the moment she saw me. I was worried. Dad's been, well, dramatic. I stepped aside, letting her in. Come in, Lily. Take off your coat. You look frozen. She smiled, but it was a sad smile, the kind a young woman shouldn't have to learn yet. Once inside, she set the grocery bag on the counter. I brought tea. Real tea, not those dusty bags you keep in the back of the cabinet. I raised an eyebrow. So now you're inspecting my cabinets? Only the ones that endanger taste buds. Her humor made something inside me loosen. Something clenched since the night I heard my son planning my absence from the world. We sat at the table, and she brewed the tea with that concentrated seriousness young people rarely give to anything anymore. When she finally sat down, she folded her hands and looked at me the way a doctor might look at a patient. Except there was love in her eyes, not assessment. Grandma, she said softly, what's going on? Dad wouldn't tell me. He just said you're being difficult. When he uses that word, it usually means he's the one in the wrong. I didn't answer immediately. I watched the steam curl up from my cup, the way it faded, leaving nothing behind. Funny how some things vanish without a trace, and yet the absence remains. Finally, I said, I heard them, Lily. Through the wall, your father and Fiona. They were discussing my funeral. She froze. The color drained from her face. My God, she whispered. They didn't. They did. Her hand flew to her mouth, eyes shining with a fury I had never seen in her. It wasn't the loud kind. It was the kind that made me proud. The quiet, steady fire that comes from recognizing injustice, not from theatrics. How could they? She murmured. You're here. You're healthy. She broke off, swallowing. I placed my hand over hers. People show who they are when they think you're not listening. She squeezed my fingers, her own trembling. What did you do? I protected myself. I told her. Not every detail, but enough. The bank, the canceled authorizations, the lawyer, the house secured. As I spoke, her expression shifted from shock to something fiercer, more determined. Good, she said finally, with a firmness that surprised even her. Good. It's about time someone told them no. I studied her face. So much of her mother in her kindness, so much of Arthur in her steady gaze. Not much of Thomas at all, thank God. She lifted her eyes to mine. Grandma, she said quietly, just tell me this. Are you safe? Yes, I answered, for the first time in a long while. She nodded slowly, as if absorbing the weight of that truth. Then she stood and moved around the kitchen, opening a cabinet, searching. What are you looking for? I asked. A vase, she said. I brought you flowers, but Dad's surprise visits always make me hide them. He thinks it makes you clingy. I nearly laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd how blind Thomas had become to what matters. She found the vase, rinsed it, arranged the small bouquet she'd brought. Winter greenery with a few white chrysanthemums. Modest, thoughtful. Not the kind bought out of duty, but out of affection. When she placed them on the windowsill, the room brightened just a little. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. She stayed until evening, until the room turned dark and the streetlights cast long shadows on the floor. When she finally put on her coat, she hugged me. Tightly, the way someone hugs a person they refuse to lose. Before leaving, she said, if they give you trouble, I'll be here in 10 minutes. I don't care what they think. I cupped her cheek. You're the one good thing they haven't managed to ruin. Her eyes softened. They never will. When the door closed behind her, the house didn't feel lonely. It felt protected. For the first time, I wasn't standing alone, and that made all the difference. That evening, after Lily left, I found myself moving around the house the way one moves through a museum of their own life, touching picture frames, adjusting curtains, straightening a stack of old recipe books. Not because anything needed tidying, but because I finally felt present inside these walls again. Not hidden, not cornered. Present. I made myself a light supper, ate half of it, and left the rest. And as I washed my hands, I realized something. The dread that had sat in my stomach for months was gone. Fear had thickened around me for so long that its absence felt like someone had opened a window in a stale room. Around 9 p.m., my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a frantic call or a threat disguised as concern. It was a message from Lily. Grandma, did you know Dad's hosting a family dinner tomorrow? At Aunt Helen's house? I blinked at the screen, unsure if I'd read it correctly. A family dinner. Tomorrow. No one had said a word to me. Before I could respond, she wrote again. I overheard him. He said you shouldn't come because you get overwhelmed. I let out a slow breath. Overwhelmed. That was the newest word they'd been using. Not elderly, not fragile, not forgetful. Overwhelmed. A modern, polite way to exclude someone without sounding cruel. My fingers hovered above the screen before I typed. I wasn't invited. A moment later. I'm so sorry. I don't understand what they're doing. I did. For the first time, I truly did. People don't push you out all at once. They do it centimeter by centimeter, kindness by kindness, until the door closes and you find yourself outside without remembering when you stepped through it. I set the phone down and stared at the dark window. My reflection looked tired, but not defeated. Just older. Older in a way that sees clearly. The next morning, Lily came early, her hair still damp from a rushed shower. She looked upset in that earnest young way. Sincerity written all over her. "Grandma," she said before even taking off her coat, "I need to tell you something else." She sat down, twisting her gloves in her hands. "Yesterday, after I left you, Dad and Fiona were talking in the kitchen." She hesitated. "They said they hoped you wouldn't show up to the dinner because it might cause tension. And Fiona said—" She stopped, shaking her head. "Go on," I said quietly. "She said that ever since you started acting difficult, they needed to reevaluate how involved you should be." Acting difficult. Funny how quickly people label you once you stop obeying. "And," Lily added in a smaller voice, "Dad said that maybe it's better if you keep to yourself for a while. Until you're calmer." I felt something inside me go very still. Not broken, just still. I reached across the table and took her hand. "Thank you for telling me, dear." She squeezed my fingers. "I don't want them to hurt you anymore." "They won't," I said. "Not anymore." We sat like that for a long moment. The kind of silence that settles between two people who've chosen honesty over comfort. Finally, Lily exhaled and said, "Are you going to the dinner?" "No," I said. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm unwanted." She nodded, her eyes softening with relief. "Good." Before she left, she hugged me tightly. "You don't deserve any of this." I stroked her hair. "None of it defines me." When the door closed behind her, I looked again at my faint reflection in the window. Excluded, undervalued, silently erased, but not anymore. Let them gather without me. Let them celebrate themselves. It only made one thing clearer. I was no longer part of their plans, and I no longer needed to be. The morning of the so-called family dinner came colder than usual, the kind of cold that settles in the joints before it settles in the air. I moved slowly, careful with my knees, making tea and folding a small stack of towels. Ordinary tasks, familiar ones. I found comfort in them. But around noon, a strange heaviness began to gather in the house, the kind you feel before someone knocks on your door. And sure enough, at 12:47, I heard a car pull into the driveway. Not Lily's soft steps, not her gentle knock. Fiona. Even through the curtain, I recognized her coat, that expensive beige thing she never stopped bragging about. I didn't rush to the door. I let her ring. Twice. Then a third time. Sharper. Finally, I opened it. "Marielle," she said, her smile tight, brittle. "We need to talk. Not may I come in. Not how are you feeling. Just entitlement wrapped in politeness." "No," I said calmly. "We don't." Her eyes widened. She wasn't expecting resistance. She never did. She drew in a breath as if preparing to perform concern. "Thomas told me you've been confused lately, and that you've been making rash decisions with your accounts." I met her gaze. "I've been making decisions, yes, not rash ones." She stepped closer, one heel on the threshold. Then let me come in so we can fix this misunderstanding before dinner tonight. I placed my hand on the door, barring her way. There is no misunderstanding, Fiona. Her lips pressed together. She lowered her voice. You're putting us in a very difficult position. The mortgage, the insurance payments, the contractor. That's your position, I said. Not mine. She bristled, a flash of real irritation beneath the act. You know we've been helping you, managing things you can't handle alone. What I know, I answered, is that you and Thomas depended on me far more than I ever depended on you. Her shoulders stiffened. This isn't appropriate. We're family. No, I said softly. We're relatives. Family behaves differently. The words stopped her cold. A thin silence stretched between us. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then finally said, You're making a mistake, Marielle. You're letting Lily put ideas into your head. I felt a steadiness rise in me, quiet, but firm. Lily hasn't put anything anywhere. I heard you both with my own ears. Her face drained of color for a moment, then flushed in blotches. He told you about that? He wasn't supposed to. He didn't tell me, I said. I heard you, through the wall, the night you discussed my funeral. Her jaw fell open, and just like that, the mask slipped. Not completely, but enough. That, she stammered, that was taken out of context. There's only one context, I said. You thought I wouldn't live long enough to hear the truth. She swallowed hard. Her voice shifted, colder now. Thomas is distraught. You're punishing him. For what? For being responsible? I held her gaze steadily. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm protecting myself. She stared at me, anger simmering beneath her forced composure. Finally, she straightened her coat. If you don't undo what you've done, she said, you're going to make things very uncomfortable for everyone. I let her words settle in the air. Fiona, I replied gently, things were already uncomfortable. I just stopped pretending not to notice. She inhaled sharply. Fine. Have it your way. But don't expect Thomas to keep fixing things for you. I never asked him to, I said, and I won't start now. I began to close the door. She stepped back, flustered, caught between outrage and disbelief. We'll talk later, she said finally, forcing a brittle smile. After the dinner. There's no later for this conversation, I answered. Good day. And I closed the door. Firmly, not angrily. Just, finally. For a long moment, I leaned my hands against the wood, breathing in the quiet that returned to the house like a loyal companion. The silence felt different now. Not emptiness, but peace. For the first time in years, I didn't feel watched, or managed, or controlled. Just standing there in my own hallway, I felt something settle deep inside me. I wasn't afraid of them anymore. Thomas didn't come back that same day, but absence, I've learned, doesn't mean peace. It just means someone is gathering their anger into a tighter ball. By the next morning, the tension in the air was so sharp, it felt like you could slice bread with it. I'd just sat down with my tea when his car pulled up. No hurried steps this time, no frantic knocking. He walked to the door with the heavy determination of someone who'd decided what story he needed to believe about me, and was ready to force it into place. I opened the door before he had a chance to knock. Mom, he said immediately, not warm, not gentle. Controlled. We need to clear the air. No, I corrected softly. You need to speak. I'm listening. That's not the same thing. He exhaled sharply, brushing past me into the house. For a moment, I let him. Old habits die loudly. But I didn't follow him to the living room. I stayed standing near the doorway, forcing him to turn and face me. He looked tired, but not the kind of tired that comes from remorse, the kind that comes from being inconvenienced. "Mom, why are you doing this?" he asked. "You're acting like I'm some kind of villain." "I'm acting," I said, "like someone who understands what happened." He shook his head. "You're not well. You misheard things. Fiona and I would never, Thomas." I interrupted him gently. "I heard you planning my funeral, through the wall, word for word." His mouth opened, then closed. Shame flickered in his eyes, brief, unconvincing. He swallowed. "People say things when they're stressed," he muttered. "You were sick. We were worried. We were trying to be practical." "Practical?" I repeated softly. "Is that what you call dividing my belongings before I was gone?" He winced. "Good. Pain means truth has landed somewhere it didn't want to go." "Mom, this isn't fair," he snapped suddenly. "I've been taking care of everything for you. Bills, paperwork, the house. You were taking care of yourselves," I said. "Not me." He took a step closer. His voice dropped. "Fine. Let's say mistakes were made. But canceling access? Talking to lawyers? Do you have any idea what position you've put us in?" "I'm not responsible for your position," I said. "Just my own." The room went still. He stared at me, searching for the mother he used to manipulate so easily. The one who apologized even when she'd done nothing wrong. The one who signed papers because he said it was easier. But she wasn't here anymore. "Is this because of Lily?" he asked finally, bitterness curling around her name. "She's filling your head with nonsense." I felt something cold settle inside me. "No," I said. "Lily is the only one who hasn't lied to me." He flinched, but anger swallowed the hurt almost instantly. "So that's it? You're choosing her over your own son?" I looked at him for a long moment, really looked at him. Not the man I raised, but the man he chose to become. And the truth was simple, clean, without dramatics. "I'm choosing honesty," I said, "and she's the only one offering it." He stared at me, stunned. Not because the words were cruel, but because they were true. And truth, when spoken without apology, becomes its own kind of force. His voice cracked then, sharp and defensive. "You're making a mistake, Mom. You're pushing us away." "No," I said quietly. "You pushed first. I just finally stepped out of the way." For a moment, he looked like he might yell, or cry, or both. But instead, he turned toward the door. "This isn't over," he said. "You can't manage on your own. You'll realize that soon enough." I opened the door for him. "I've realized something else instead," I said. "You only come when you need something." He stopped in the doorway, shoulders tight. "That's not true." "Then tell me," I said, my voice soft but steady. "One day, just one, when you came because you wanted to see me. Not my checkbook, not my signature. Me." Silence. He had no answer. Finally, he walked out. Not fast, not angry, just defeated in a way he didn't want to name. I closed the door carefully behind him. My hands were steady. My breathing was steady. And for the first time in many years, my heart was steady too. Not because the hurt was gone, because the truth had finally taken its rightful place. He didn't stay gone for long. Men like Thomas never do. When a door closes on them, they circle back, convinced that pressure is the same thing as love. By evening, the sky had dimmed into that dull winter violet, and I'd finally settled into my armchair with a blanket across my lap when the phone rang again. Not a call this time. A message. We need to talk. Tonight. I'm coming. Not a question. Not a request. A declaration. The tone of someone who still believed this house answered to him. I set the phone aside. I didn't tell him yes. I didn't tell him no. But at 7:11 p.m., I heard the gravel shift under his tires. No hesitation this time. He marched straight to the door and knocked hard, 3 times, the sound rattling the glass. I opened it without a word. He walked in before I stepped aside. The air around him carried that smell of cold anger, metallic, sharp. "Mom?" he started, pacing already. "This has gone far enough." I closed the door, leaning on it for support, though not from fear. My body tires faster now. That's all. Thomas stopped in the middle of the living room. His jaw was tight, his eyes restless. Like a man who had already rehearsed the speech he wanted to give and only needed me standing still for it. "You can't do this," he said. "You can't just cut us off financially. We have responsibilities. Your decisions affect more than just you." "My decisions," I answered, "affect me. That's who they belong to." He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You're being manipulated. Lily has filled your head with ideas. She doesn't know anything about obligations, about—" "Stop," I said softly. He froze. Not because my voice was loud, but because it wasn't. I took a slow step toward him. "You keep blaming Lily because you don't want to face what you did." "I didn't do anything," he snapped. "You're blowing everything out of proportion." I studied him for a long moment. The crease between his brows, the way he couldn't quite meet my eye. And then I said the sentence I'd held in my chest for days. "I heard you planning my death." He flinched, as if struck. "You don't understand what that conversation was." "I understood exactly what it was," I said. "You were preparing for a life where I wasn't here. That's not fair." "It's honest," I said, "which is more than you've been with me." He pressed his palms to his forehead and began pacing again. "If you undo all this, we can fix things. But right now, you're putting us in a terrible position. Fiona is furious. We're behind on bills. This was all set up." "Without my knowledge," I reminded him. "Without my consent." His shoulders tensed. He turned sharply toward me. "You owe us some support," he said. Not shouted. Worse, stated as if it were fact. "Oh?" I repeated, the word tasting sour. "For what?" "For years we've helped you. You helped yourselves." My voice remained soft, but the air around us shifted. "Every month you took money. Every year you asked for more. I said yes because I believed it brought us closer. But it only made you comfortable. It didn't make you grateful." He shook his head, angry tears at the corners of his eyes. Not sadness, but frustration. Children hate when the parent they control stops being controllable. "I'm your son," he said hoarsely. "You're supposed to help me." "I did," I said. "I helped you grow into a man. What you did afterward was your choice." He swallowed hard. "So that's it? You're cutting me off?" "I'm letting you stand on your own legs," I said. "Something you should have learned a long time ago." His expression contorted. Not rage now, but a deeper panic. "What do you want from me?" he whispered. "What will make this stop?" I felt something quiet settle in me. The final truth. "I want nothing from you," I said. "Just honesty. Just kindness. But you haven't offered either in years." He stared at me, really stared, as if seeing someone he didn't recognize. And maybe he was. I walked to the door and opened it. "Good night, Thomas." He hesitated, His jaw trembled. For a moment, I thought he might apologize. But pride is a stronger chain than love. "This isn't over," he said again. "No," I answered. "But the old way is." He walked out into the cold, shoulders rigid, breath sharp in the winter air. I closed the door gently. My hands were steady. And for the first time as a mother, I'd stopped excusing the inexcusable. The next morning, the house felt strangely peaceful, as if it too understood that something important had shifted. Not finished, no, the road wasn't that short, but shifted. A weight had moved from my chest to the space just above my ribs, where determination lives. I made oatmeal, added a little honey, and actually tasted it. Funny how food changes when you stop eating out of habit and start eating because you're still here, alive, stubbornly alive. By midday, the sun had pushed through the clouds, a thin winter sun, but warm enough to stretch across my kitchen table. I sat there, going through Harold's documents again. Protective measures, revocations, clauses, safeguards, all written in a language that would have intimidated me once, but not now. Not when the alternative was surrender. At 1:30, I heard a soft knock. Not urgent, not demanding. Lily. When I opened the door, she was holding a small box of pastries from the bakery she always loved as a child. She held them up with a shy grin. "I thought, maybe you'd want these." "I always want pastries," I said. "Come in." We sat at the table, and she opened the box. The smell of butter and cinnamon filled the kitchen. For a moment, we just ate quietly, the way family should. After a while, she wiped her fingers and said softly, "Grandma, Dad's been calling everyone. He's saying you're being manipulated, that you're unstable, that you're not thinking clearly." I nodded, unsurprised. A person who loses control always claims the other is unreasonable. Her face tightened. I told him I'm not getting involved, but he was angry. At me. "I know," I said gently, "and I'm sorry he put you in that position." She hesitated, chewing on her lip. "I don't like seeing you go through this." "I've gone through worse," I said, "but never with this much clarity." Then I placed the folder on the table. Thick, unmistakably important. "Lily," I began slowly, "I need to talk to you about something I've decided." Her brows lifted. "All right." I opened the top page. The newly drafted trust Harold had prepared. The trust that would protect the house, the savings, everything Arthur and I had built across our lives. "This," I said, sliding it toward her gently, "is what I'm leaving behind." She blinked, confused. "Leaving to who?" "To you." Her breath caught. "Grandma, no, I don't need anything from you. I just want—" "I know," I said. "That's why you're the only one I trust with it." She looked at the papers, then at me, eyes glistening. "But it's too much. And Dad, your father will be angry," I said. "Yes. But his anger is not a reason to reward his neglect." Lily swallowed, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I don't want to hurt him." "You aren't," I said. "His choices hurt him, not mine, and not yours." She wiped her face quickly, embarrassed, but I took her hand. "Lily, listen to me," I said softly. "This isn't just about inheritance. This is about dignity, about making sure what I spent a lifetime working for doesn't become a trophy for people who only showed up when they needed something." She nodded slowly, her fingers trembling in mine. I continued. "The trust protects the house, protects the funds, protects me while I'm alive. And you, once I'm gone. And no one," I added. "Not Thomas, not Fiona. No one can touch it." Her eyes widened. So they can't undo this? No, I said. Harold made sure of it. For a moment, she just sat there, stunned, quiet. Then she whispered, "Why me?" I smiled. A small, tired smile. Because you see me, not my money, not my house. Me. She covered her mouth with her hand, shoulders shaking. I stood slowly, joints protesting, and pulled her into a gentle embrace. She held on tight, tighter than she ever had before. When she finally exhaled, she said, "Grandma, whatever happens next, I won't leave you alone." "I know," I replied, "and that's why I chose you." Later, when she left, the house felt full, not with noise, but with meaning. Real family doesn't take. It stays. It listens. It cares. And with the trust signed, sealed, and protected, I had finally taken back not just my life, but my legacy. They found out on a Thursday. Not because I told them, I hadn't intended to tell them anything, but because people who expect ownership over others' lives always keep sniffing around banks, offices, records, gossip. Entitlement has a way of pushing its nose through every crack. At 3:12 p.m., my phone lit up with Thomas's name. I let it ring. Then Fiona called. Then Thomas again. Then a message. "What is this trust? Why is the house locked legally? Call me now." I didn't. Instead, I folded laundry. Slowly, deliberately. The small domestic rhythm grounding me, while their panic thrashed against the distance I had finally built. By early evening, I heard their car. Not one this time. Both. Doors slamming, footsteps pounding up the walkway. I stayed in the living room, back straight, hands resting calmly on my lap. The knock came sharp, frantic. I opened the door. They pushed in without waiting. Thomas looked wild, hair disheveled, eyes frantic. Fiona stood behind him like a blade wrapped in silk. Her anger quieter, colder. "What did you do?" Thomas demanded, voice cracking with disbelief more than rage. "Mom, what on earth did you sign?" I felt a strange stillness inside me, the kind that comes after you've accepted the truth about someone and stopped expecting kindness. "I protected myself," I said. "You locked us out of everything," Fiona snapped, stepping forward. "The accounts, the property, even future decisions. What kind of lawyer would let you do this?" "A competent one," I said gently. Thomas ran a hand through his hair. "This is insane. That trust, it gives Lily control, not us. Lily. She's a child. She's 25, I corrected. Old enough to know the difference between love and convenience." They both froze, because the accusation stood naked in the air, and neither of them could deny it. Thomas's face flushed. "So you're just cutting us off? After everything we've done for you?" "Tell me," I said, keeping my voice soft. "What exactly have you done for me in these last years?" Silence. Not the thoughtful kind, the guilty kind. Fiona stepped forward, recovering her composure first. "This trust can be contested. You're vulnerable. You were pressured." I almost laughed. Not unkindly, but with the weary knowledge of someone who has finally stopped being underestimated. "My lawyer explained the protections," I said. "It cannot be challenged. Not by you. Not by anyone." Thomas shook his head violently. "You choose her over your own son? Over your family?" "You chose money over your mother," I replied. And I finally listened. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, like he was searching for the right apology but kept choking on pride instead. "You're going to regret this," he whispered. Not a threat. A wounded prophecy. "No," I said. "I regret the years I believed you needed me, when all you needed was my silence." Fiona exhaled sharply, her composure cracking. So what now? We're just cut out? You removed yourselves, I said, when you began planning a life without me in it. Thomas's eyes flickered. Shame, disbelief, a hurt he didn't expect to feel. I never meant to lose you, he said, voice suddenly small. I nodded. But intention doesn't erase harm. And silence doesn't erase truth. For the first time since all this began, I saw it. The realization dawning in him that something precious had slipped through his fingers, something he thought was permanent, immovable, guaranteed by blood. He stepped back, breathing unevenly. Fiona touched his arm, guiding him toward the door. Before he left, he turned to me one last time. Is there anything I can do? He asked, but not kindly, desperately. Yes, I said. You can choose to be better, but I can no longer wait for that. His shoulders sagged. He nodded once, barely visible, and walked out. The house felt warm when I closed the door. Not triumphant, not victorious, just honest. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of losing my family, because I finally understood. A family that must be protected from your boundaries is not a family you truly have. The day after their visit, the house felt strangely lighter. Not happier. No, happiness isn't something that returns overnight, but unburdened. Like a room where a heavy piece of furniture has finally been carried out, leaving space you didn't realize you needed. For the first time in weeks, I woke without dread tightening my chest. I made toast, drank my tea while it was still warm, and opened the curtains to let in the pale winter sun. The world outside looked exactly the same as it had before, yet I saw it differently. Perhaps that's what reclaiming your life feels like. Familiar things become honest again. I spent the morning walking through the house, not out of worry, but out of care. The radiator in the hallway needed bleeding. Arthur used to do it, but I managed slowly with the little wrench he left behind. In the closet, I found an old quilt I'd meant to repair years ago. I spread it out on the dining table, running my hands over the stitching. Uneven, but warm. Made in a different life, when nights were filled with small comforts and not calculations about who might take advantage of me. I sewed for a while, my hands remembering the motions even if they moved slower now. Thread in, pull through, tighten. A simple, steady rhythm. The rhythm of someone who still has time. Around noon, I stepped outside into the crisp air. My garden lay dormant under frost, but the bones of it were still there. The hydrangeas Arthur planted, the stubborn lavender that refused to die, the row of stones Lily and I set together when she was 10. I took my pruning shears and trimmed a few brittle stems, not because it would change much in winter, but because tending to living things, even sleeping ones, reminds you that you, too, are still living. Inside again, I began sorting through drawers that hadn't been opened in years, not to prepare for anything, but to reclaim the space from the shadow of their plans. Old letters, birthday cards, photographs of vacations we could barely afford, but took anyway because life was short and love was longer then. I found Arthur's old compass, the one he carried on every hike. It didn't point north anymore, but holding it steadied me. He used to say, "A compass is only useful if you're honest about where you're standing." For the first time in a long while, I was. Later, I cooked myself a modest dinner, potatoes, a little chicken, a side of greens. No one to impress, no one to feed except myself. I ate every bite slowly, tasting things instead of swallowing them to get through the day. When I washed the dishes afterward, the warm water on my hands felt grounding, almost comforting. The evening came gently. I turned on the small lamp in the living room, the one with the yellow shade that makes the whole area feel softer. I sat in Arthur's old chair, wrapped in the half-mended quilt, and breathed in the quiet. Not loneliness, not fear, just quiet. I thought about the past weeks, the shock, the betrayal, the cold realization of what my own son had become. And yet, as I sat there in the soft light, I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel defeated. I felt something else entirely. I felt like a woman who had survived a storm by refusing to lie down in its path. A woman who had stood up when everyone expected her to fold. A woman who had learned, painfully and finally, that dignity is not given by others. It's reclaimed from their neglect. Before going to bed, I walked through the house one last time, turning off lights, checking locks. A small ritual of safety, a ritual of belonging. When I reached my bedroom, I paused at the doorway and whispered, almost to Arthur, almost to myself, "I'm still here, and I'm still mine." Then I turned down the covers, lay my quilt across the foot of the bed, and let sleep come naturally, without fear hovering beside it. For the first time in a very long time, it came gently. In the days that followed, life didn't suddenly become sweet or simple. I still woke with aches in my hips, still moved slowly in the mornings, still paused on the stairs to steady myself. Age doesn't step aside just because dignity has returned. But something inside me shifted, quietly, firmly, irrevocably. One afternoon, a soft wind swept through the neighborhood, the kind that comes just before spring but still carries winter's breath. I put on my coat and stepped outside. The yard was still bare, leaves matted and brown, but the soil underneath felt softer when I pressed it with the toe of my shoe. A good sign. A reminder that seasons change whether we prepare for them or not. I walked the length of the fence slowly, touching each post the way you touch old friends you haven't seen in years. In my garden bed, the first green tips of my daffodils were just beginning to push through the cold earth. I crouched, careful, and brushed away a bit of debris. "Still fighting," I murmured. To them, to myself. Later, back inside, I brewed tea and settled into Arthur's chair, the half-mended quilt draped over my legs. The house was quiet, but not empty. There's a difference. Empty is a space waiting to be filled. Quiet is a space at peace with itself. I looked at the photographs on the mantel. Some faces gone now, some grown, some unfamiliar to the people they became. Thomas's picture from childhood, 7 years old, missing his front tooth, laughing with a joy that had once come easily. I didn't turn the frame away. I didn't need to. I wasn't erasing him. I was releasing myself. There was no bitterness in me. Not anymore. Bitterness takes energy. And I had spent enough of that on people who mistook me for a resource. Instead, I felt something softer. Sadness, perhaps, but the kind that settles without drowning you. A sadness with room to breathe. As the daylight thinned, I heard footsteps on the walkway. Light ones. Then that familiar double tap on the door. Lily. When I opened it, she stood there with a small potted herb. Rosemary. "For your kitchen," she said. "It's supposed to bring strength and clarity." I smiled. I think I'm finally learning that on my own. She stayed for tea, and we talked. Not about Thomas, not about legal documents or betrayals, but about her job, her classes, The book she was reading. She laughed easily, the way young people should, and I listened, the way older people learn to, with gratitude for every sound that reminds them life still moves. Before she left, she hugged me tight. "You seem lighter," she whispered. "I am," I said. I stopped carrying other people's choices. When the door clicked shut behind her, the house felt warm again, not because of the heater, but because someone had visited with love, not expectation. That night, before bed, I stepped out onto the porch. The air was cold, but the moon was full and bright, laying a silver path across my yard. I stood there for a long time, breathing slowly, deeply, letting the past settle in its proper place. Behind me, not inside me. "They planned my funeral," I said softly into the night. "But I stayed alive. And that was enough. Not loud, not angry, just true. And in that truth I felt something I didn't expect at 79 years old. A beginning. A quiet one, but real. A life no longer shaped by fear or guilt or inherited expectations, but by choice. My choice. I turned back toward the house, switched off the porch light, and whispered a small, steady promise to myself. I'm still here, and I will live whatever time I have left with my head high. Then I closed the door gently, the way you close a book you finally understand. And if stories like this speak to your heart, stay with me.